Scar 20S, made by FN. This is Powerhouse. Chambered in 308.
There are lots of other semi-autos made in 308 Winchester, including, but not limited to, AR-10s, the SOCOM 16, and various hunting rifles. Now its rimless, bottleneck design is perfect for bolt actions, which is the most common action for the 308. But, like the 30-06, it is made in virtually any action, including several lever guns and at least one pump action. And there are more firearm options, at least in the realm of tactical semi-autos, lever guns, and possibly some bolt actions that are offered in 308, but not in the 30-06, which makes it, at least in my opinion, more versatile in that way. And speaking of the 30-06, 308 is also a 30 caliber with the same bullet diameter of .308 inches. Same thing with the 30-30, along with others that I do not have, like the 300 Savage, 300 Win Mag, and the 30-40 Craig. And if you'll notice the different shapes and sizes, and notably the rim 30-30 compared to these two rimless ones. And despite the fact that all three have the same bullet diameter, along with others, none of these calibers are interchangeable, as gun chambers are made to fit a caliber by its specifications, which is called headspace. And as a side note, a 30 caliber doesn't necessarily have to have a bullet diameter of .308 inches. The 303 British, for example, has a .311 inch diameter, and the 338 Win Mag's diameter is .338 inches, as its name implies. Like most modern calibers, the 308 is a centerfire cartridge. Its pointed end means it's a Spitzer bullet, which is pretty standard for military use and is more aerodynamic than a round or flat nose bullet like this 30-30, which helps to make it more capable of hitting targets at 1,000 yards and beyond, though it is used more commonly for closer targets. And 308's measured in grains from 100 to 220, with 150, 165, and 180 being the most common. And as you can see here, this one has a polymer tip and a brass casing, but there are lots of other variations like full metal jacket, soft tip, and steel casings. The 308 Winchester was designed in 1952 for the American military. However, it did not enter the military world until 2 years later, but it immediately was released into the civilian market, and right away it became a success for hunters, and not just in North America, but in the whole world.
Yeah.
In fact, some hunters will say that the 308 can accomplish the same task as the 30-06 when it comes to North American big game. Some Canadian and Alaskan rangers and hunters have taken down Kodiak and grizzly bear, and polar bear also with the 308, but there are still some hunters who say the 30-06 is the bare minimum for taking down North American big game or dangerous game. Additionally, this caliber is a popular choice for police shooting, competition shooting, whether it be professional or amateur, and target practice, which, as I've mentioned before, does include long range. In fact, someone can use the same 308 rifle to participate in all of these activities, vastly expanding on this 30 caliber's versatility. The military version of the 308 Winchester is the 7.62 by 51. Now, externally, they are virtually identical in appearance, but internally, they are different. For example, The shell walls of the 762 are thicker than the 308, therefore giving it less powder and making it a less hot round. And more so, the chamberings in the rifles are totally different. It is different, like maybe by a fraction of an inch, which might not sound like enough to make a difference, but it does indeed make a difference, believe it or don't. Now, military firearms typically have a slightly longer chamber than civilian arms, so it can help ensure the cycling and ejection of the spent shell casings, and therefore reduce the chances of a jam or any kind of a malfunction, which is the very last thing you'll need on the battlefield, or anywhere for that matter, but more so at the battlefield. Now when it comes to being interchangeable, I have heard that the 762 can be fired out of chambers made for the 308 and not vice versa. I honestly do not know which is true and which is not, so I do not recommend trying to interchange any of the ammo unless you actually know what you're doing. But some of the reasons being, since the 308 has a much thinner shell casing wall, it's more likely to stretch out a little bit more after the bullet has been fired, thus taking up more space inside the chamber, while the 762 is far less likely to stretch out. And even though the 30-06 served the military well, and it still performs excellently with hunters today, the time had come to find a replacement. And a caliber that matched the same bullet diameter of the 30-06, that performed with virtually the same, or nearly the same ballistics, with less recoil, was desired. Eventually, the 308 was developed, and it is unclear to me if whether the 300 Savage was the parent round for this, or if it was the 30-06. I've heard different things from different sources, but it is agreed on that experiments were used with the 300 Savage in deriving a new caliber for the military, and these experiments started as far back as the 1940s. You see here how the 308 looks like a shorter version of the .06, being about half an inch shorter. Now the angles at the shoulders are different, with the 308 having a 20-degree angle, while the .06 has a 17.5-degree angle. Despite the M1 Garand's success, it was too heavy to carry, and it was limited to only 8 shots, and it was harder to reload than a rifle with a detachable magazine. It was replaced by the M14 chambered in the 7.62 by 51 in 1957, which was similar in appearance with a 20-round detachable magazine capacity, and there was a switch for selecting semi-auto or auto fire. Now, in spite of these new advantages and the excellent performance of the 7.62 by 51, the M14 was still too heavy, with being just less than a pound of the M1 Garand, and the automatic fire was very difficult to control. With its 22-inch long barrel, the rifle was too hard to maneuver effectively in the dense jungles of Vietnam, and the humidity in the tropical climate had caused the wood stock of the gun to swell, thus making handling more difficult. So soon afterwards, the M14 was replaced with the M16, which was chambered in the 5.56 NATO. But the military did keep the 7.62 by 51 in military use, but more specifically for long-range and sniping purposes. In modern times, there have been advances in technology, and many new cartridges have been designed that compete with and arguably outdo the 308 in popularity and performance. For example, the military is leaning towards possibly replacing the 308 with the 6.8 millimeter or the 6.5 Creedmoor. Now, the 6.5 Creedmoor is a caliber that directly competes with the 308 in terms of long range. Now, it does travel farther, and it is a little bit more effective at further ranges, and it does have a little less recoil than the 308, but on a downside, it is more expensive. But that is not the only caliber that competes with the 308, and it certainly doesn't only compete in the military world only, but also in the civilian world, as many hunters prefer other calibers such as the .243 Winchester and the 7mm 08 Remington, which ironically were devised from the 308. And on that note, the 308 is actually the parent round of quite a few other calibers out there, including the 307 Winchester, which seems to indicate to me anyway just how great of a round the 308 Winchester really is. So in closing, there are a lot of people out there who say that the 308 Winchester is becoming obsolete, but there are those who think that it's still going strong and it's not leaving anytime soon, even though it might be declining a little bit in popularity since there are so many new options to choose from. Now, am I one to make a judgment call on that? Not really. I still see 308 being sold quite a bit, but then again, that could just be because there are so many 308 rifles still floating around. Now, how many of those are being purchased today? I personally do not know.
5 full mags of this boy to go do some testing. I gotta pull the muzzle brake off because it's gonna get a suppressor put on it.